As the sun set over the glittering waters of the Mediterranean in 264 BCE, the ancient world stood on the precipice of a conflict that would reshape the power dynamics of the Western Mediterranean. The siege of Messana marked the beginning of the First Punic War, a war that would draw Rome and Carthage, two great powers of antiquity, into a titanic struggle. This chapter will explore the events leading up to this crucial moment, the decisions that set Rome and Carthage on a collision course, and the first skirmishes that ignited a war lasting over 2 decades. The city of Messana, perched on the northeastern tip of Sicily, held a position of immense strategic importance. It controlled the narrow strait separating Sicily from the Italian mainland, a critical choke point for any power seeking to dominate the region. By the early 260s BCE, Messana had become a flashpoint in the simmering tensions between Rome and Carthage, thanks to the actions of a group of Italian mercenaries known as the Mamertines. The Mamertines were originally Campanian mercenaries, once employed by the Syracusan tyrant Agathocles. However, following Agathocles' death in 289 BCE, the Mamertines turned on their employers. Seizing the city of Messana, they massacred or expelled its inhabitants and established themselves as its rulers. From their new stronghold, the Mamertines conducted raids across northeastern Sicily, antagonizing both the Greek cities and the Carthaginian territories on the island. By 265 BCE, the Mamertines had worn out their welcome with nearly every power in the region. King Hero II of Syracuse, who had established himself as the dominant force in eastern Sicily, decided to put an end to the Mamertine threat. Leading a powerful army, Hero besieged Messana, intent on bringing the city under Syracusan control. With the situation growing increasingly desperate, the Mamertines sought assistance from two very different powers, Carthage and Rome. Carthage, ever mindful of its strategic interests in Sicily, was quick to respond to the Mamertines' plea for help. The Carthaginians had long maintained a foothold in western Sicily, where they controlled key cities like Panormus and Lilybaeum. However, securing Messana would extend their influence into the eastern part of the island and give them control over the strait, a crucial gateway to southern Italy. Recognizing the opportunity, Carthage dispatched a garrison to Messana, led by the commander Hanno. The Mamertines, relieved at the arrival of Carthaginian troops, initially welcomed the garrison. However, they soon realized that their new protectors had no intention of leaving. The Carthaginians, rather than merely aiding the Mamertines, effectively took control of the city, raising the Carthaginian banner over Messana's walls. This development alarmed the Mamertines, who feared that they had exchanged one master for another. In a desperate bid to regain their independence, the Mamertines turned to Rome, appealing for protection against both Syracuse and their new Carthaginian overlords. The arrival of the Carthaginian garrison in Messana had also not gone unnoticed by Rome, where the Senate debated the implications of Carthage's move. The appeal from the Mamertines put the Roman Senate in a difficult position. On one hand, aiding the Mamertines could drag Rome into a conflict with Carthage, a power with whom Rome had previously enjoyed relatively peaceful relations. On the other hand, allowing Carthage to establish a foothold in Messana would place a significant Carthaginian presence at Rome's doorstep, threatening Roman influence in southern Italy and the wider Mediterranean. The Senate was deeply divided. Many senators were reluctant to intervene, viewing the Mamertines as nothing more than opportunistic mercenaries who had brought their troubles upon themselves. Moreover, the prospect of war with Carthage, a wealthy and powerful maritime empire, was daunting. However, others in the Senate saw the strategic importance of preventing Carthage from gaining control of Messana. They argued that Rome could not afford to let Carthage dominate Sicily, a move that would undoubtedly embolden other enemies of Rome in Italy and beyond. Ultimately, the decision was made to intervene. The Senate, swayed by the argument that Carthage's control of Messana would pose an unacceptable threat to Roman security, authorized a military expedition to Sicily. In 264 BCE, the Roman consul Appius Claudius Caudex was given command of 2 legions, a force of around 16,000 infantry and 600 cavalry, in order to cross the strait and take control of Messana. As the Roman legions prepared to march, the political and military situation in Sicily grew increasingly tense. Hero II, who had been besieging Messana, now found himself in a complex 3-way conflict involving the Mamertines, the Carthaginians, and the incoming Romans. For Hero, the stakes were high. If he could take Messana, he would secure his hold over eastern Sicily and eliminate a persistent threat. However, if the Romans succeeded in establishing a foothold on the island, it could spell disaster for Syracuse. As the Roman army approached the Strait of Messina, the Carthaginian fleet, stationed nearby, attempted to block their crossing. The Carthaginians, well aware of the threat posed by a Roman intervention, sought to prevent the Roman legions from setting foot on Sicilian soil. The initial attempt to cross the strait was repelled by the Carthaginian ships, forcing the Romans to retreat to the mainland. However, Appius Claudius was not easily deterred. The Roman consul regrouped his forces and prepared for a second attempt to cross the strait under cover of darkness. This time, the Romans were more successful. In a daring night maneuver, Claudius led his legions across the strait, bypassing the Carthaginian blockade. By dawn, the Roman army had landed on the Sicilian shore, ready to march on Messana. The arrival of the Roman legions sent shockwaves through the region. The Carthaginians, caught off guard by the speed and determination of the Roman advance, withdrew to their positions within Messana. Meanwhile, Hero, recognizing the gravity of the situation, chose to temporarily withdraw his forces to Syracuse, leaving the Carthaginians to face the Roman threat alone. With the Roman legions now in control of the approaches to Messana, Appius Claudius ordered the city to surrender. The Carthaginian commander Hanno, however, refused to yield. Believing that his garrison could hold out against the Romans, he prepared for a siege. The siege of Messana was the first major military engagement of the First Punic War. On one side stood the Roman legions, seasoned from years of fighting on the Italian peninsula, but inexperienced in the kind of warfare that would define this new conflict. On the other side were the Carthaginians, skilled in naval warfare, and accustomed to relying on their fortifications to protect their holdings in Sicily. The Roman legions, equipped with their traditional weapons, gladii, pilum, and large scutum shields, began to encircle the city. The legions were organized into three lines, the hastati in the front, the principes in the second line, and the triarii at the rear. This formation allowed the Romans to rotate their troops during battle, keeping fresh soldiers at the front while the weary ones retired to the rear. To break the stalemate, Appius Claudius ordered a series of assaults on the city's walls. Roman engineers, skilled in siegecraft, began constructing siege engines, including battering rams, siege towers, and catapults. The Carthaginians, for their part, mounted a determined defense, using their superior knowledge of the terrain and the city's fortifications to repel the Roman attacks. As the siege dragged on, the situation inside Messana grew increasingly dire. Supplies dwindled, and morale among the Carthaginian defenders began to falter. Hanno, realizing that his position was becoming untenable, attempted to negotiate a truce with the Romans. However, Appius Claudius, determined to secure a decisive victory, rejected the overtures and continued the siege. As the siege of Messana continued, Hero of Syracuse watched the unfolding events with growing concern. The presence of both Roman and Carthaginian forces on the island posed a significant threat to his own position. Hero knew that if either power gained control of Messana, it would alter the balance of power in Sicily, potentially threatening the independence of Syracuse. In a calculated move, Hero decided to re-enter the fray. He gathered his army and marched towards Messana, hoping to exploit the situation to his advantage. His goal was twofold: to prevent either Rome or Carthage from gaining complete control of the city, and to position Syracuse as the dominant power in Sicily. The arrival of Hero's forces created a three-way standoff around Messana. The Roman legions, the Carthaginian garrison, and the Syracusan army now found themselves locked in a tense and volatile confrontation. For a brief period, it seemed that the situation might escalate into a full-scale battle involving all three powers. However, the decisive moment came when Appius Claudius, displaying the strategic acumen that would become a hallmark of Roman commanders, launched a surprise attack on Hero's forces. In a swift and brutal engagement, the Roman legions routed the Syracusans, forcing Hero to retreat back to Syracuse. With the Syracusan threat neutralized, the Romans turned their full attention back to the siege of Messana. Hero's forces in retreat and the Carthaginians isolated, the siege entered its final phase. The Roman legions intensified their assaults on the city, bringing their siege engines ever closer to the walls. The Carthaginians, worn down by weeks of relentless attacks and cut off from any hope of reinforcements, were nearing the breaking point. Realizing that further resistance was futile, Hanno decided to attempt a daring escape. Under the cover of darkness, the Carthaginian commander led a small contingent of his troops out of the city, hoping to slip through the Roman lines and make his way back to Carthage. However, the escape attempt was detected by Roman scouts, and Hanno's forces were intercepted and captured. Hanno himself was taken prisoner, marking the end of Carthaginian resistance in Messana. The fall of Messana was a significant victory for Rome. By capturing the city, the Romans had secured a crucial foothold in Sicily and demonstrated their resolve to challenge Carthage's dominance in the region. The victory also sent a powerful message to other powers in the Mediterranean. Rome was no longer content to remain within the confines of the Italian peninsula. It was now a player on the wider stage of Mediterranean politics. and its ambitions extended far beyond its traditional borders. The capture of Messana did not bring peace to Sicily. Rather, it marked the beginning of a much larger and more destructive conflict. The fall of the city served as a catalyst, setting off a chain of events that would soon engulf the entire island in war. The Roman Senate, emboldened by the success at Messana, ordered further military expeditions into Sicily, aiming to push Carthage out of the island altogether. Carthage, meanwhile, was not prepared to relinquish its holdings in Sicily without a fight. The Carthaginian Senate, outraged by the loss of Messana and the capture of their commander, ordered a massive military buildup in the region. New armies were raised, and the Carthaginian navy was mobilized to protect the remaining Punic cities on the island. As both Rome and Carthage prepared for a protracted conflict, the stage was set for the next phase of the First Punic War. The battle for Sicily would intensify, with both sides committing vast resources and manpower to the struggle. The war would see the emergence of legendary military leaders, the development of new strategies and tactics, and battles of unprecedented scale and ferocity. The siege of Messana was just the beginning. The conflict that had been sparked by the ambitions of Rome and Carthage, and the desperate pleas of a group of mercenaries, would soon escalate into one of the greatest wars of the ancient world. A war that would determine the future of the Mediterranean and the fate of two of its most powerful civilizations.